I mean, I can't cook with these.
I can't cook with ease. Julie, don't get me wrong. I mean, what you got going on is hot. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out why you got this whole Saturday Night Fever thing going on a Wednesday night.
She said the government's investigation and prosecution of Ms. Chrisley, as well as her trial and conviction, were widely reported by the media across the country, publicly humiliating her. This damage to Miss Chrisley's reputation serves as additional deterrence. That is maybe an okay argument to make if you're not a reality TV star.
Right.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing.
Hey everybody, Doug Passon coming to you again, not from Studio 3553, and you may notice if you're watching on the YouTubes, I'm wearing the same spiffy blue shirt and gray jacket that I've been wearing for the last 2 episodes that I've done with Mark Allenbaugh. Yes, peeling back the curtains behind the scenes. We've done a triple header. We've just been together here all afternoon talking about high-profile sentencing. So we've done Sonny Balwani, we've done Michael Avenatti, and now we are going to do the Chrisleys, Julie and Todd Chrisley, the reality stars down in Atlanta who just got sentenced for white collar for fraud cases. We've been kind of lining them all up together to see what we can extract, comparing and contrasting these cases. So like I said on Avenatti, I want you to go back to the Balwani episode because Mark Allenbaugh did a great job of sort of laying out all of these cases together with charts. By the way, they're in the show notes, and go to the YouTubes and everything else. But you can just kind of see how everything kind of shakes out because these are all simply fraud cases at the end of the day with dollar amount losses that the guidelines drive. Dollar amounts drive the guidelines. And so it's really, really interesting to put them all side by side and see where, why, and how it all shakes out. So do that. But now we're going to just kind of come back into the Chrisleys and peel back a little of the onion and see what else can we learn about federal sentencing from what happened in Georgia with our friends Julie and Todd Chrisley. So Mark Allenbaugh, thank you for staying with me. I think we've been at this for over 3 hours now, which is fucking awesome. Or that means we have no life. I don't know. You take your pick, but hi, how you doing? Welcome back.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah.
Good to be back on this marathon session. Lots to talk about.
We are having more fun than anybody should talking about the United States sentencing guidelines. And of course, these are real people with real lives and real consequences. So we're not making light of it. It's serious business, but you know, it is what it is. So let's dig in. We have tell us about the Chrisleys. What kind of case is this? What are they convicted of? Give me the rundown.
Well, the Chrisleys were convicted, as you were mentioning. They have this reality television show, and they were convicted of various forms of fraud, and they were found to have approximately $20 million in loss they caused to various entities, investors and banks, I think, something along those lines.
Yeah. So lying on bank there, he's getting loans, millions of dollars of loans, lying to get these loans.
Yep.
Then he's declaring bankruptcy and lying in bankruptcy and keep his money. Like, it's just kind of layers and layers of ick there. And it's him and his wife who get ensnared in this, and they go to trial.
Yep.
And they lose at trial. So now they got to be sentenced. And tell me what are they looking at under the guidelines?
Okay. Well, what you're looking at here are the advisory sentencing range for the Chrisleys, as well as the sentence that they actually received. So for Todd, his sentencing range was up here at like around 25 years. Actually, it was specifically, it was 210 to 262 months, or so around 20 years. And Julie Chrisley was just over 10 years, 10, 11 years, 121 to 151 months. So those are their sentencing ranges here in the orange boxes that we could see. And the blue stars show the actual sentence that they received. Todd got 144 months or 12 years, and Julie received 84 months or 7 years. So neither of them, lucky for them, neither of them received a guideline sentence, which really isn't all that surprising. Most people would think that they were given a break or something like that. And the truth of the matter is, in these high loss cases, and again, they were attributed $20 million of loss between the two of them. And it basically any case, any loss amount over $1 million is considered a high loss case, since 90% of all fraud cases have less than $1 million. At any rate, in high loss cases, the higher the loss amount, the more frequent judges sentence below the guidelines, and the farther below they go. In other words, the rate and degree of the downward variance increases as the loss amount increases. So judges basically recognize that in these high loss cases, just looking at loss alone, even though it's the biggest factor for purposes of the guidelines, judges tend to discount it even more as the loss amount goes up. So your first $1 million might be given a lot of weight, but your last million, if it's a $20 million case, is given a lot less weight than that first million in terms of how it impacts your sentence. And so, but what's really interesting here about the Chrisleys, though, I think, and what gives us a good example, a real world example of sentencing disparity, isn't so much the fact that they both received downward variances from the sentencing guidelines, but the gender disparity that really is, it's not inherent in the guidelines because it's not written in the guidelines, but the fact of the matter is that women tend to, by and large, get much lower sentences than men do for the exact same conduct. And I just did a really quick and dirty analysis of the fraud guidelines under 2B 1.1. So what I'm sharing here is the raw data files from the Sentencing Commission. And what I did was I looked for everybody that was sentenced from 2006 through 2021. So everybody post Booker, in other words, during the era when the guidelines have been advisory. In 2021 is, of course, the latest data that we have available. So looking at all those sentenced under the fraud guidelines that had a loss amount between $9.5 million and $20.5 million, because that is the loss range that the Chrisleys found themselves within. Again, they had a $20 million loss range. So under the guidelines, if you have a loss between $9.5 and $25.5 million, you're treated the same. So the guidelines don't differentiate between any of that loss amount. So I looked at everybody within that range, and there were 1,497 of those individuals in that loss range. I didn't filter out for any the total offense level or the criminal history category. So this is just looking at loss amount, plain and simple. The average sentence was 75.2 months, but here's the big difference. The average between the male and female. The average male sentence was 78.6 months, where the average female sentence, and again, this is basically the same conduct or the same severity of conduct as far as the guidelines are concerned, was 60.3 months. So men on average got a sentence of 1.5 years higher than what women received for basically the same conduct. Mm-hmm. And these numbers here indicate the number of offenders that met these criteria. So there are 1,220 men in this group with a loss between $25.5 million and $277 million. So that's a pretty significant data. That's a lot of data, excuse me, for each gender. So it makes for a pretty fair comparison. And this disparity is pretty significant. This isn't just some statistical anomaly. This shows that there's a real world effect going on here.
It makes me think of the Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani case that we've already dug into, where I think the discrepancy between their two sentences was almost precisely what you said. The statistical, did you say a year and a half?
About a year and a half, yes.
Yeah. And I think that was maybe missed it by 0.25. Like, didn't she get 13 and she got 11 and he got
she got 130. The difference there was 20 months.
20 months.
Balwani got 155 and Holmes got 135. And
wow.
and they were also close. a high loss. They were a high loss case also.
Yeah.
Actually much higher loss. They were at 100 million.
All right, so actually the discrepancy here in the Chrisley case was way more significant, I think, right?
Yes and no. Part of the discrepancy, let me get back to that screen here. Part of the discrepancy with the Chrisleys can be attributed to the guideline range. Julie Chrisley got a much lower guideline range than her husband, than Todd. But nonetheless, that translated into, of course, a lower sentence. She was attributed, though, and this is important, she was attributed the same loss amount as he was. And so the big takeaway here is, even though their guidelines are different, he had some other sentencing factors and sentencing enhancements that she didn't have. Nonetheless, the biggest sentencing factor that they had was the same. And that was the loss amount.
Yeah.
And that was $20 million each. And he got he got about 60, he got 60 more months, 5 years more than his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that can't be attributed just to the difference in the guidelines alone. There is some gender disparity, it appears to me, that's going on here also, which is what we're seeing across the board in the guidelines generally. Yeah.
And it's hard to know for sure. You got to read between the lines about what's animating the judge's final decisions on these enhancements and the sentence she's going to impose. Mm-hmm. One could simply chalk it up to, well, the dude was more culpable, more deeply involved in the fraud than Mrs. Chrisley, and so he deserves more time. It's also possible that the judge, like we talked about in Holmes, where you can kind of arrive at a guideline range that makes you feel good about the end sentence. So maybe they don't want to give both of these people as much time, and they're going to let one go down. So who knows? I mean, who knows? It's just so freaking random in so many different ways.
Well, and you're right, but just ignore the guidelines for a second. And forget about the guidelines and all, because they're advisory, and that's basically what judges do, is they forget about the guidelines. They go through all this calculus and all this rigmarole, and at the end of the day, they're going to impose the sentence that they want to sentence them to, where their gut is. And what I think is so troubling about this disparity here, if their loss amounts, the severity of their offenses opposed to their culpability, the severity of their offenses are the same, that it's troubling to me that would entail a sentence 5 years greater for Todd than for Julie. I mean, that's almost double of what she received. Again, she got 7 years and he got 12, so he got five more years than she received. Is his culpability that much greater than hers? I would argue no, especially if you're just forget about the guidelines and just look at the pre-guidelines offense structure. I think without the guidelines, it would be very hard to explain the disparity in these two sentences other than a gender disparity.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't sit through the trial to know what the facts were, but I read all the pleadings of sentencing memos, which we're going to get into in a second. And there isn't a whole lot in there that would give us any indication that their levels of culpability, their levels of involvement, their levels of knowledge about what's happening, their levels of spending the money on lavish things were any different.
They were a married couple.
They're a married couple, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, but anything else on the guidelines or the stats before I tell you what my take is on the sentencing memos?
I'd like to look at the life expectancy here.
One. And so just make sure. I mean, I'll operate on an assumption that our dear listeners haven't been through this dance a couple times with Holmes and Balwani and everything else, but this is a significant sentencing mitigation argument that defense lawyers consistently don't know or overlook, don't know about, and need to know about, and it's life expectancy, especially when you have someone who is over the age of 50, and I think Todd was 54 at the time of sentencing or something like that. So you've got to dig into life expectancy, but you've got to do it in the way that Mark Allenbaugh is going to talk about.
Right. So what we're looking at here is Todd's life expectancy based upon something called the Patterson study. And as we've discussed in several of your episodes now, Patterson study it's a peer-reviewed published study that showed, after reviewing tons of data on inmates, that inmates on average lose 2 years of life expectancy for every year that they are imprisoned. So what I did here was we start off with Todd, and we're assuming that he's going to report in 2023. I don't think he was immediately remanded, but he was 53.8 years old as of now. And according to the Social Security Administration, his life expectancy, he's expected to live to be 82.2 years. So applying the Patterson study to this, he's going to lose 2 years for every year that he's in. So what that means is statistically speaking, he's not going to survive his sentence that he received, basically a de facto life sentence, because he's only expected to live to about 2032, sometime between 2032 and 2033. So in about 10 years, he's going to die in prison. And he was sentenced to 12 years. So statistically, he's not going to make it. But let's look at Julie.
While you're pulling that up, it bears noting that every time we brought this Patterson study up, at least from Holmes on, it's the same. Well, maybe not Holmes, because she's the youngest of all of them, but from Balwani to Avenatti, now to Chrisley, it's the same conclusion that you're reaching in all of these things, which is the sentence they got could very well be a life sentence. And judges aren't necessarily always too hip to giving someone a life sentence for a case like this if they had the information necessary. Needed.
And so the other thing too, that this is a disparity that I guess you can't fault women for, but they tend to live longer and they have healthier lives than men. So Julie Chrisley, who is also younger than her husband, she's 50 years old right now. She's expected to live to be 85.4 years. So applying the Patterson study to her, she will make it to the end of her sentence. Again, it's only 7 years, so she's expected to live. She doesn't have a life sentence. So the point simply is that between Todd and Julie, not only is there a vast disparity, but unlike Julie, Todd got a de facto life sentence. Julie is going to have a life after her sentence is completed.
Well,
so that's even more of a disparity.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm kind of glad to hear that for Julie, at least, but that's important stuff. I haven't been putting the Patterson study in the links. I need to do that though. So I'm going to make sure I put this very beautiful life expectancy chart in the show notes and link to the Patterson study. And of course, Mark's always out there, sentencingstats.com, if you need more info on that. Let's talk about sentencing memos. I've been having an interesting time just sort of dissecting these and comparing and contrasting. And I always start with the government, due deference. I don't know why, but I'm going to do that now. I'm going to share the screen. And what's the verdict here? I've been effusively praiseworthy of government memos when it was warranted, and bluntly honest when I don't think it's so good. And this is not so great. So we're starting out. So just so everybody understands, I'm going to do this basic. What is a sentencing memo? A sentencing memo is the lawyer's opportunity on each side. The government's lawyer gets a chance and the defense lawyer gets a chance to submit a very substantive, thorough pleading, a document that basically lays out everything they think the judge needs to know to impose sentence. So the probation office does their pre-sentence report, which has all the things that the probation office thinks the judge needs to know, and then each lawyer gets a chance. So this is a golden opportunity to frame the issues, tell the story, and really, really advocate and persuade the decision maker, which in federal court at sentencing is always one person, the judge. So this is a great opportunity to tell a powerful story. So you're either going to take the opportunity, you're going to blow it. That's it. And time after time after time, I see lawyers on both sides blowing it. And in fact, I probably see them blow it more than I see them actually hitting a home run. So here's what happens. We are taught to come out of, this is persuasion 101. It's storytelling 101. You're not going to go to a movie and right out of the gate see something silly and boring, right? You want somebody to hook you in and say, I want to take this ride. I'm excited about taking this ride. Let's do this. Yeah. And so the way you start a sentencing memo is absolutely crucial. So how do we start here? This is the government's memo, and here it goes. In 2019, defendants Todd Chrisley, Julie Chrisley, and some dude named Peter Tarantino were indicted by a federal grand jury for a variety of crimes. Who is your audience there? I mean, this goes to the judge. Do you think the judge forgot that there was an indictment in this case? Because I'm pretty sure she sat through a really long trial with all of them. Wasted space, wasted opportunity. The grand jury. Oh, good. Now we get to learn about the grand jury. They returned a superseding indictment. Who the fuck cares about a superseding indictment in February 22nd? Sorry for my profanity. I'm getting very saucy. It's late. During the 3-week trial in May and June of again, I'm pretty sure the judge knows what month the trial. This is all just like blathering, nonsense, gibberish. The United States presented evidence of the Chrisleys' conspiracy to obtain tens of millions of dollars in loans by defrauding community banks, which they later walked away from when Todd declared bankrupt. So it's getting a little bit juicier there, at least. But again, like judge sat through a 3-week trial. She knows all this stuff. So this would have been actually an opportunity to help the judge understand how to feel about all this. Because what you're telling the judge is information she already knows. So why wouldn't you take the time to frame the issues, they tee it up? And let me go back to Elizabeth Holmes memo, because I told you, like, praise where praise is due. I'm going to read you the opening paragraph from Elizabeth Holmes that the government did. Same deal. Judge sat through month-long trial. He knows about the indictment and the superseding indictment and all this stuff. Over the course of many years, Elizabeth Holmes defrauded dozens of investors of hundreds of millions of dollars. Time and time again, she chose deceit over candor. She forged her own endorsements. She preyed on hopes of her investors that a young, dynamic entrepreneur had changed healthcare. She leveraged the credibility of her illustrious board, and through her deceit, she attained spectacular fame, adoration, and billions of dollars of wealth. When a journalist dared to ask questions about Theranos' actual achievements, she tried to dupe him and then attacked him along with his sources. After her fraud was revealed, she lied, obfuscated, and concealed. At trial, she blamed her COO and longtime boyfriend, her board, her scientists, her business partners, her investors, her marketing firm, her attorneys, the media, everyone, that is, but herself.
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about. That is what I'm talking about, right? So talk about a missed opportunity there from the government. And do you see how the devil is in the details when you're talking about narrative? You can throw out these sort of bland words that mean nothing on kind of like on their own, like conspiracy. They said Chrisley's conspiracy to obtain tens of millions. What does that even mean? A conspiracy? Tell me what you're talking about there. They defrauded banks. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know. They obstructed the grand jury. This is all they said in the opening. And then they tried to blame others for all their crimes. So, and then they end with sentencing is set for November 21st, 2022. It was like, Judge, just in case you didn't understand that there's a sentencing pending, that's how we're going to end our opening. Okay, don't do that. Come on. I don't understand how these seasoned experienced lawyers are still writing like this. It's sort of an abomination. Anyway, and the rest of it is a whole bunch of legal stuff, and I'm bored to tears, and it's 71 pages.
Yeah.
And I'm not reading that whole thing. I didn't get through it, and I don't care.
Well, one thing, Doug, that I'll say that though that I did like about the government sentencing memo, and I wish more defense attorneys would do this, is if you look over on pages 3 and 4, they have a nice little table there.
You love your charts, don't you?
Yes, I do love my charts. But the reason why I love the charts is for the same reason you love the videos. You can communicate much more efficiently and effectively. And
yeah, that's true.
And what the government does here, which again, I wish more people would do, is on pages 3 and 4 of the memo, is they have little tables just summarizing the guidelines calculation. Rather than going through paragraphs and paragraphs and trying to figure out what the guidelines are and how everything adds up or not add up, they just summarize it here for both defendants, and it's very clear and easy to read. I might have done it a little bit differently, but I mean, I certainly give them an A here for that. And one of the other things that they do, even though the memo is way too long, but later in the memo, buried down towards the end, they do use a lot of screenshots, like of emails and of maps and things like that to make their point. And I think that's for the same reason, that's a very effective way of grabbing the court's attention rather than burying something in an exhibit or something like that. If it's very, very important, especially like if it's a map or a chart or something, put it in the memo itself. So I do give them some kudos for that. But to your point, I think it started out very poorly and it's far too long.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm so glad you were able to be the sobering yin to my raging yang. And we like hope. We like positivity. So, the government would probably be sending you a thank you note for saying something nice about them. I agree. Anytime you can put visuals in this document, that you're doing well. And I also think they could have gone further because we talked about Michael Avenatti's case and how they did a pretty good job of framing the themes of greed and hubris. And here you have these reality stars whose whole persona is based on their extravagant lifestyle and their beautiful mansion and getting manicures and pedicures and all this fancy stuff. And it was all a bunch of it was all a lie, right? And so, not only could they thematically have run with this in their opening, to do something more along the lines of the Holmes thing, like, I don't know, like, what's like living a lie or these there's nothing real about these reality TV people or whatever it may be. But they could have actually they could have done screenshots of the lavish, of the greed, of the spending. Look at all this fraud you're committing.
The houses that they lived in, the cars, and all that other stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
And there was probably a lot of that they could have just gotten off the cable TV show and screenshotted that.
Absolutely. And so, okay. So now I want to talk a little bit about the defense sentencing memo. And it does kind of hurt my heart. And I'm guessing that the lawyers for the defense aren't going to be listening to this episode of Set for Sentencing, but who knows? If so, I have to preface this with my apologies. It's one of the worst sentencing memos I think I've ever seen in a high profile case like this. It really is. I mean, I've seen some horrible sentencing memos in worse in my time. Where they're either not, the worst sentencing memo is one not filed, which is certainly a thing. Some lawyers don't even bother to file a sentencing memo, which, unless it's just there's really very little to decide at sentencing and it's a stipulated plea and the issues are decided, like there's really no good reason not to file a sentencing memo. And I'd say in most cases, you're probably committing malpractice if you don't, but in any case, it's a wasted opportunity to take control of your client's narrative and humanize them and tell their story. So I've seen some shitty memos. The worst one is the one not written, but I've seen some shitty memos. This one is not good. And I want to just go give you my 2 cents about why I feel that way. And not trying to hurt anyone's feelings, but, we like to be honest here, right? So, I'm a big proponent of opening with a bang. We've already talked about it. This beginning legalese happens all the time. I'm not going to fault them for that. I don't love all these herein's and thereofs and comes now. You don't have to do all that, but that's the way we're taught. We're taught all wrong. But the real money is how are you going to really start this once you get through that prefatory language? Initial advisory guideline calculation. The pre-sentence report calculates Mr. Chrisley's sentencing guidelines at a total offense level of 42. Should the court accept the blah, blah, blah. This is a sentencing range of 360 months to life imprisonment. The government in its sentencing memorandum. Why would you cite the government's sentencing memo? They wrote a sentencing memo. Like, who cares? And then it just goes on and on about the 18 levels and the 2-point increase. And by the way, it's a pet peeve of mine that everybody calls them points. These are not points.
Yeah. Levels.
They're levels.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. It's just pet peeve of mine. I don't know why. These are levels. They're not points. If it's criminal history, you can say points, I guess. But these are levels. Anyway, okay, so we're now on 2 pages in, and the next thing is the purpose of sentencing. So now we have to educate this judge, who by the way, I looked up, is an Obama appointee and a former assistant United States attorney.
Yeah.
So probably like a dozen years of federal practice under her belt, 7 or 8 of which have been as a federal judge. But this counsel feels like it's a useful exercise to mansplain to her the purposes of sentencing.
Yeah.
The purpose of sentencing guideline is to provide guidance to the court in fashioning a sentence that achieves an appropriate measure of punishment using uniform metrics. But that's only one factor, and the court is ultimately free to reject, after due consideration, the advice of the guy. Mark, did you know there was this case called, what is it? Kimbrough versus United States.
Yeah.
Apparently it was decided back in 2007. You see
I'm
what
surprised.
I'm saying?
I'm surprised they didn't cite Booker. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Booker's I think Booker's in Julie's memo. Legit. We'll get there. So you're telling this good judge all this stuff and then, okay, next part, legal standard. This I really love because what they're doing is emphasizing the worst aspect of the sentencing guidelines, in my opinion, which is all these enhancements you can find in the guidelines, you only have to find by preponderance.
Right.
But please explain it to her some more, because I'm sure she doesn't know that that's the legal standard that applies. You see what I'm saying here? Like, I'm not trying to be a dick, but come on.
Yeah. It's all wasted space.
You don't need any of this stuff. Yep. The judge knows all of it. And then now this is Shirley's law. So this is the government story. The offense conduct is X, Y, Z. And all they're doing now is chipping away at the edges. They're like a little dog nipping at the heels of the guidelines and just trying to pick at it and pick at it and pick at it for pages upon pages upon pages upon. This is a 33-page sentencing memorandum, which so far has said fuck all.
Yeah.
This is going to be one of those parental guidance episodes, because I probably just said, you know, this didn't involve sophisticated means and bleep, blump, bloop, and this, that. So, God, I don't even know how long it takes us to get to here, 3553A, which is, okay, another perfect example. So, you know, this is where I live. This is my beating heart and soul. 3553, the nature and circum. This is where you start to really tell the story of the person and how they achieved this moment. Well, guess what they start doing? They start telling us what 3553 is and what the elements are, and to provide this blah, blah, and we've got 4 pages of explaining what a couple pages of 35 until we get to some semblance of a story here, which by that point, I mean, it's not even saying much of anything, and still going on goal to protect the public and this and that. So oof,
this is so generic. This is just generic, like a cut and paste job.
They do some elderly aging population here. We're now at page 18 of 33. So they do talk about, hit some of these generic notes. The specific notes would have been his age, 54, in the life expectancy charts that you did. So a lot of generic stuff right there. Anyway, there's 54. And there's some litany of things. He has fibromyalgia. They don't talk about. This is a perfect example about the story narrative. Is the details are so important. So he suffered from fibromyalgia. Do you know what that is?
I think it's just you're in chronic pain.
Yeah. Some kind of nerve thing where okay, but now it's time to tell a story. What is that? How severe is that pain?
And why does it matter?
Why does it matter? What does that look like in custody? What about what about mobility? You know, how many bunk you're going to be in a bunk bed? Well, what if you need a bottom bunk? Guess what? There's a limited amount of bottom bunks. Maureen Baird could tell you that. And there's all these different ways you could say this is why this is important, but they just kind of gloss over it. He takes several prescription medications to treat various symptoms. Well, what about that? How's that work in the BOP? What if you have a prescription not on the formulary and you're not going to get it? And your pain is going to be exacerbated. So why does that matter? That means it's a relativity story, meaning the sentence Todd Chrisley is going to endure is exponentially more punitive than the sentence that Joe Schmo, who doesn't have fibromyalgia and doesn't need these expensive medications, is going to endure, which is a reason for a lower sentence because he's going to do harder time. So these are all missed story opportunities. And and
nothing about COVID. Nothing about COVID.
Oh yeah, nothing about COVID. No, and he's probably vulnerable if he's got all these various symptoms of a disease and everything else. Who knows?
Well, humor me just 1 second. Humor me 1 second, just in regard to that. I want to show everybody this. Everybody that is watching this video should link to this website right now or bookmark it. And this is the CDC, and this should be cited in everybody's sentencing memo. This is a table put together by the CDC, updated last month. Risk for COVID by age group, okay? And Todd is 54, so he's in the 50 to 60. Oh, can you see this?
Yep.
Okay, so he's in the 50 to 64-year-old age group. He is 3 times more likely, just by his age alone, 3 times more likely, and 25 to be hospitalized, and 25 times more likely to die from COVID than somebody in the reference group. That's 18 to 29 years old. That's an important factor for judges to be aware of.
COVID is still a thing. We'd love to believe
COVID's going to be a thing. I know we want it to be over. It's going to be a thing for a long time, for many years to come. And the commission is, by the way, looking at that right now. The Sentencing Commission is looking at that and expanding compassionate release and all these other things. But the point simply is that just saying, look, I got an elderly inmate isn't enough. You need to expand on that and give some hard data and how is this relevant, and be aware if you're going to write a boilerplate sentencing memo, well, damn it, get some boilerplate stuff about COVID in there, because everybody that's been alive for the last 3 years knows about COVID and how it's affecting the Bureau of Prisons. And this is something that's very important. That was a missed opportunity that's not in there.
Yeah. And so thank you for that. And I pretty much done with this, but well, not really, but I just highlighted this word. Can you see that?
Yeah, the heartland.
So he's outside the heartland of offenders. I was in law school, and it was I went to Washington D.C. I was on the moot court team, and we got to go argue in Washington D.C. and my coach clerked for Sandra Day O'Connor back in the day, so he brought us to the Supreme Court to hear oral arguments. This was 1995, I think, or 6. And it was Coon versus United States that we got to hear argued in front of the Supreme Court, which is where this heartland nonsense comes from. Stacey Coon was one of the officers that beat Rodney King. Remember, can't we all just get along? We're dating ourselves. But that's the point. This heartland shit is ancient history.
Right.
This was back in the day when the guidelines were mandatory and the judges had virtually zero power to deviate from them, until a white police officer beat the shit out of a black motorist, and all of a sudden the law goes, well, maybe we should have this one little exception to just say if it's outside the heartland, we can deviate. So when a lawyer to me starts using the word outside the heartland, to me it's just another red flag. So anyway, maybe I'm getting too picky about this. I don't know. But the last thing I wanted to note is sentencing letters. So we've talked about how sentencing letters, the good, the bad, the ugly. Sometimes they're effective, oftentimes they're not, because they don't say a whole lot and they're redundant, and there's so many of them. I think Elizabeth Holmes had 130 submitted, and Lawani had 50. And I don't know how many Chrisley had, but what the lawyer did here, actually not a bad thing, tries to bring some of the sentencing letter content into the memo to highlight the good works of the person's life. Because remember, we don't judge a person by their worst mistake. We judge them by their life's work. My problem is that they're bringing in, it almost looks like whole letters that they're bringing in. So like, I will bullet point a line or two, but this goes on for
it's just copy and paste.
It goes on for 9 pages. So what does that say? Like, I don't trust you, judge, that you're going to read the letters I attach, so I'm going to bring them in verbatim. Look how long that is. Because judges are going to read this stuff by and large, I think. And so this is good in theory, but not so good in practice. Look, I'm still going. Do you notice this?
Yeah.
I'm still going. So
and this is ugly. I mean, it's just ugly to read. It's hard to read. It just doesn't flow well. And this is where I think sometimes attorneys forget that judges are human beings.
Yeah.
And they're not just machines. They're going to sit there and absorb every word.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, but that's a memo that started bad and went from bad to worse. All that boilerplate, everything else. No, we're not going to do that. The overarching problem, again, like I said in Avenatti's, when we did that, no story. There's no explanation of how he gets in this mess, and there's no indication that he has any acceptance of responsibility or that he's going to make up for it now. Unlike Avenatti, Chrisley went to trial, so we do see that. I mean, in fairness, he went to trial, so it's hard. He still has an appeal. He might get a retrial. So lawyers are necessarily going to be cautious about falling on your sword, admitting all the guilt. I'm so sorry, and this is why I did what I did. You're not going to see that in a lot of these fraud cases that have gone to trial, because the lawyer's limited in what they can say. That only means one thing. All you're left with is really the work that you do to compare the stats, the relativity stories and the redemption stories in terms of show me your true character. Who are you?
Yeah.
And the more you can do that powerfully, preferably with visuals, a lot of times, that's my jam. Then what you're doing is pushing back on the government's narrative, the greed and everything else. So they relied on the letters to do that redemption arc. And I got lost in all those bullet points. So I don't even know.
It's hard to read.
Yeah. So there were 2 sentencing memos because there were 2 defendants. So we had husband, wife, and I won't go through too long, but I did think, well, you pointed out the interesting discrepancy just by virtue of gender.
Right.
But I will say this, in terms of missed opportunities and the barking dog nipping at the heels of the guidelines, the boilerplate, oh my God, there's literally almost 4 pages of just guidelines are discretionary.
Yeah.
Boilerplate language in this. I'm not even going to pull it up and show you there's no point, but this is the memo where they cite to Booker, which is Booker is 2005 now. So we're almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Booker is the case.
The guidelines have been advisory longer than they were mandatory.
Right. And pretty sure this judge knows it full well.
Yeah.
So you've just blown through 4 pages of utter nonsense. So congratulations there. It was interesting because, and I think this dovetails into your stats about the gender difference. This is a mom and a dad, and both of them have 5 kids together. They're children.
Yeah.
Most of them are grown. 33 is the oldest one, 31 years old, 26, 25. But then they have a 16-year-old son, and they have a granddaughter. One of their kids, for some reason, they're raising their 10-year-old granddaughter. And so, mom, Julie, makes rightly so, I think, a legitimate argument that these are children who need their mom at home, especially if dad is going to be in prison, right? It's going to be devastating to these kids.
Right.
Now, the judge, of course, might say, well, you probably should have thought of that before. That's the standard rap. But still, there's some, like you said, these are judges are human beings.
Right.
And for all I know, this judge is a mom. So those are emotional arguments that resonate. I'm interested to know why there's no story about the 10-year-old. Well, some of this is redacted, so maybe it's in there, but maybe there's a story opportunity for that. Reveals great character that they got 5 kids of their own and they're taking on the responsibility of raising their granddaughter. Why is that happening?
Right. Exactly.
It's probably a story of family strife or dysfunction or illness or something that they didn't need to step up, but they stepped up, and that's their true character. So I'm super curious about that. They talk about how she's the primary caregiver for his mom, Todd's. So the mother-in-law, 79-year-old mother-in-law who I think was sick with cancer or something like that. Which I thought was interesting because they're married. So why isn't her own son
exactly?
Like, where is he in that? Yeah. So here's the thing that stood out to me as maybe, I don't know, the most interesting argument I've seen in a while, which is she says that the public humiliation is a factor that should lower her sentence. The public humiliation of the trial. So she said the government's investigation and prosecution of Ms. Chrisley, as well as her trial and conviction, were widely reported by the media across the country, publicly humiliating her. This damage to Ms. Chrisley's reputation serves as additional deterrence. So, that is maybe an okay argument to make if you're not a reality TV star
right.
on a ridiculous program like Meet the Chrisleys. Because I'm pretty sure that whole public humiliation ship sailed a long time ago. I don't watch the show, but I've seen snippets of it. I'm like holed up in a hotel room or something, flipping through the channels, and it's like a train wreck you can't look away from. So like the whole show to me is an exercise in public humiliation.
Well, I don't mean to be cynical, but Martha Stewart went through the same thing. That, if anything, that helped her career. So I don't know how much humiliation there is here.
Yeah, it gave her street cred. Like now
they gave
she's
her some
like
street cred.
making pot brownies with Snoop Dogg.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Right. Which is awesome.
Let me just pull up. I was just online. This is not Martha Stewart that we're talking about here.
What do you mean, who am I?
You look good.
You look pretty.
Thank you. You like my makeup? You like my eyelashes?
Yeah.
What have you been doing?
Lee and I had a great day. I got a new blouse, new makeup, new nails.
No, honey, those are lock pickers.
Those look like Wolverine claws.
I'm trying to up my game a little bit.
I'm just glad you're home, Mama, because everybody needs dinner.
Y'all are gonna have to fend for yourselves.
What?
I mean, I can't cook with these.
I can't cook with these. Julie, don't get me wrong. I mean, what you got going on is hot. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out why you got this whole Saturday Night Fever thing going on a Wednesday night.
If you treat a woman right, you can have Saturday night fever every night.
And I'm down with that.
Well, I'm gonna go get my bath, so you guys can handle it.
We're gonna starve.
No, you won't starve, I promise you.
Okay. That's as much as anybody needs to of that. It's cringe. It's cringe.
It's cringy, yeah, as the kids say nowadays.
Okay, yeah. But it's the trial is what's going to cause her the public humiliation. I'm sorry.
Correct, yeah. Those nails are humiliating enough.
Yeah, so, it's just about, you make the arguments that you can make that give you credibility, and you got to leave the ones aside. So anyway, yeah, so that's the Chrisleys, man. And the takeaway, again, go back to the original one that the overview you did for all of these, because, the takeaway is these guidelines, it's a crapshoot, right? It's nonsense.
Yeah, it's especially in these high loss cases.
Yep. All right. So I'm sure there'll be plenty more of these to discuss, and we have in the very near future coming up the Trump stuff and Sam Bankman-Fried. Did I get that right?
Yes.
SBF.
Yes, SBF. Mm-hmm.
And so another massively high-profile fraud case.
Oh yeah.
And both of them haven't been convicted of anything, so we'll do the whole presumed innocent thing, but we're definitely going to dig into what could be coming down the pike for them.
Oh, and just on the presumed innocent thing, presumption of innocence doesn't matter at sentencing.
That's true.
But although that could be changing in the new year.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that too, because there's all these Supreme Court cases pending that talk about relevant conduct, acquitted conduct at sentencing that we've been talking about, and we've been talking about with Professor Doug Berman of The Ohio State University, who is our favorite sentencing professor expert who does Berman's blog. And I just heard from him. He's going to come back on the podcast with you and me, and we're going to talk about all that. So the takeaway is a lot of cool stuff happening 2023. I'm so glad you're a part of this ride. So again, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go because we've been at this now for 4 hours.
4 hours, wow.
That's a marathon.
Yes, it is.
I'm going to get out of these clothes and have some dinner, and I'm going to talk to you soon, man. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Doug.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassanlaw.com. I'm Doug Passan. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.